Today I'm going to look at converting one of these SCART to component leads into an RGB lead. And this is one I've actually already done. They're quite easy to get hold of, it seems, secondhand. And you either get like the component ones or you get the composite ones, and the composite ones aren't a lot of use. Whereas these component ones, turns out that the red, green and blue are already wired up to the same pins. Even though in component it's B minus Y, R minus Y, and just Luma or whatever it is. Different type of signals, but they go to exactly the same SCART pin out as the RGB. So I've made this diagram out of a thing that was in the back of the Dick Smith catalogue. But it's pin 7, 11 and 15 I think are the RGB in, but they're also component in. The difference with this, it's actually got sync over those lines. So these other two plugs that come on the original leads, these are called audio out, right and left. It depends what the lead is, it could be in or out, because there's different pins for the different audios. This I think was on 1 and 3 or something. Yeah, so it would have been audio out. But what I did with this one, since we've already got two leads in here, I actually wanted to add sync and a switching voltage for an older TV that actually has no selection on the AV switch for anything but tuner and AV. If you want to go from composite input as the standard or the default to RGB input, you've actually got to put in 1 to 3 volts up a pin. So on these SCART connectors, they I think the pins start from 1 and 2 down here, so it's all even numbers on one side, all odd on the other. They've got a total of 20 pins. Bit hard to see down in there. Yeah, that's it. So it starts with pin 2, and then it goes like 4, 6, 8 on one row up to 20. And the other one starts on 1, then 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on up till 19. So depending whether you look from the back or the front, the wiring diagram, you just got to be careful about that, but they are labelled on both sides I think, or you can just flip it over and look at the front. Now most of these do come apart, even though they're a manufactured sort of cable. The SCART connector isn't moulded, all the RCAs are moulded in, but these you can just undo that and pop this back shell off. You can even take this metal bit off if you want to, and that gives you access to the back here. We can see our red, green and blue in there with earths. So we've got the earth wire, so they're shielded. That's another good sign, you want those to be shielded. And originally, I believe it was those two pins there, which are 1 and 3. Yeah, like I said, so that's audio outs. According to our diagram here, I haven't actually added the audios, but on the top here, pin 1, pin 3 are audio out, which is probably in this list here. Audio output left for 3, audio output right for 1. So all I did was basically unsolder these, what was the black and white wire, from pin 1 and 2, and move them across. The white one I've moved across to pin 16, which, if we look here for 16, it's RGB status or fast blanking. So when you've got an RGB TV on an early one that doesn't have an AV type switch anywhere to switch to RGB, as you can see here, just the default is composite video mode, which is 0 to 0.4 volts. But if we put between 1 and 3 volts in there at 75 ohms, so if you've got a 5 volt source, like I do in my pattern generator, it's about 180 ohm resistor, so once it hits that sort of 75 ohm loading, it'll drop it down to, I think it was about 2.5 volts or something, with that amount of resistance. So I'm not sure what happens if you put 5 volts straight in there, whether it recognises it or not. It probably doesn't. So you want it to drop somewhere in that 1 to 3 volt range at 75 ohms. So if you've got a different voltage, you'd have to work it out as basically a dropper resistor going into a 75 ohm resistor to get your voltage right. So I managed to pull that cable across from where it originally went down on these audio pins across to 16. The other one wasn't quite long enough, so this yellow wire I had to solder it on, and it's underneath this bit of insulation tape I put here, and that's pin 20. So basically, even though this wire here is white on pin 16, but I think that actually comes from this black plug, and that I'm using now as the switching voltage. I've actually put a socket on the back of my pattern generator, so it supplies off the 5 volts. It goes through a 180 ohm resistor. So by the time it gets into the TV or other device, and it's a 75 ohm sort of impedance, that drops it down to between the 1 and 3 volts. So I think it came out around 2.5 volts or something. And this other white plug, which I've now written sync on, so I know what it does. I had to move that across to pin 20. It wasn't quite long enough since it was originally soldered to the other end of the plug for the audio. So I've added this yellow wire and just wrapped it up in some tape there. Extended that, so that goes to pin 20. If we look here, we can see 20 is a composite video input. So whether you put sync up there off an RGB source or a jammer board or something that's only got actual separate sync there, or whether you put composite up, I don't think it really matters. When it goes into RGB mode, it can strip the sync off the composite signal, I think, because I've got a PlayStation lead and that's putting out composite and RGB at the same time. And the only thing I do to get it into RGB mode, that plug, of course, the PlayStation doesn't have any switching voltage there, but I put an external couple of wires in, and when I put the 5 volt into that lead, then it switches. Obviously it's still composite going into pin 20, but it switches it into RGB mode when I put a voltage up this pin 16 one, and you can see it's definitely switching to RGB, so it must be getting its sync pulses. I don't think there's any sync necessarily on the RGB lines, but it's getting the sync from somewhere, so possibly from the composite going in on pin 20. And I just did a little diagram here. I might put it on the end of the video. So pin 20 composite sync, pin 16 is the RGB switching voltage, 1 to 3 volts, and you got red, green and blue in, but we didn't have to modify those anyway. The other thing I might do with the other lead I got here, which is exactly the same as this, is try and hook up an extra couple of leads for audio, or maybe I can use the extra couple of leads to do the sync and just leave the original audios in place as they were. And when you put these back together, they're a little fiddly. You'll find there's a bit of plastic sticking out behind where the metal bit is, and that's got to go into these little slots in the back shell. There's a little bit of a dip there and then a little ridge. So if you've got to get those lined up so that the plug doesn't push back into the back shell part once you put it back together. And that doesn't seem to want to go in that way. Maybe I've got to go the other way. I'm not sure whether there's a specific end this bendy bit has to go to, but it would have to on this one. It has to go a particular way. So if I can get that, slide that in until it hits a stop there, and then carefully put this top one in and just press it to make sure that can't move. And then we just tighten our clamp back up. And this one I've just written mod RGB on it, so I know that I've modified it and what for. So this one works fine with a pattern generator, which has no audio in it anyway. And it's got the switching voltage, the sync line and your RGB. And I all tested that out and it runs fine. So here I have just a cable as I bought it. This is what they're made as a component lead. But like I say, in the second-hand shops and that, they seem to be quite common, more common than the older style composite Scart leads, which were all the go once. So again, we open this up. We can check it against our diagram here. The numbers are usually stamped on these things down the front, not the easiest things to read. But yeah, again, we're starting at 1 and 2 down this end. So RGB should be 15, 11 and 7 plus the earths on the pins next to those. So we know that's 19, 17, 15 is red as it should be, and the earth next to it on 13. So it'll make 11 is green, 9 is green earth, and then 7 for blue and 5 for blue earth. And we've got 3 and 1. So this has got the same audios, audio outs as that other one did. So this would plug into, say, a DVD player, set-top box, VCR, whatever, something like that. Doubt it'd be a VCR with component output, but one of those type of devices. And it was that was made for going from a SCART signal source into a component TV, obviously, because these are the audio outs. Although why would they label those audio out? I guess it means audio out of the SCART. It's a bit confusing really, because you're going to the audio in on the TV, so I guess they kind of got to call them audio outs because they're coming from the SCART. Or I guess they could be confused for audio out if you plug these into a device and you're trying to go into a SCART connector on a TV or monitor. Then audio out's kind of wrong, because you'd think that the audio out of the device you're plugging into would work, because it says these are labelled audio out, so go on the audio out sockets, but they don't really. We'd actually have to swap them over to 2 and 6 if we want them to be audio into a TV. So even my idea was to convert this lead over with the least hassle, but it turns out I'm going to have to change those to 2 and 6, which will be the leads on the other side, the first two I think. Oh, 2, 4, 6 it goes, doesn't it? So 2 and 6 are the, yeah, so there's probably an earth on the second. Let's have a look here. Pin 1 audio out, pin 2 audio input, pin 4 audio ground, yeah, 3 audio output. So there isn't where's yeah, so 4, that was the one in between the audio ground, yeah, then 6 is audio input. So it's just got 1 audio ground on 4 in between the other 2 pins. And in this one, our audio, or that ground, has already been hooked to something for ground. Maybe it is the audio ground. Also want the one between the audio output, 1, 3, and the one after is 5. That's the blue ground. So that must be the audio ground in all cases is 4. But luckily these are all made to be opened up and easily modified, so we can unsolder any of these wires and swap them around to different pins. And I'm sort of thinking I might get an RCA lead and see if I can stick that up in here, but I don't think there's really a lot of room. Is the hassle in these back shell things. There is a little bit of room around that. So it doesn't, this one doesn't actually clamp the, oh yeah, the clamp's there, isn't it? So that's why it's got a bit of room. So we may have to cut another hole somewhere. Could easily cut a hole out the back here and just run a RCA lead out through there, a twin one. So what I'm thinking of doing is getting just a standard stereotype RCA lead and adding that as our sync plus the switching voltage. But we've got quite a bit of cable here. I'll have to cut that little joiner thing off as well. Won't be as long as the other cable, which is a bit annoying. Maybe I can leave that on the outside, but I may have to file or drill some sort of hole here somewhere. So that I can get those wires in, because I don't think there's any real way, I could try it I guess, of clamping them in there, but then we'd have to get them through the other bit as well. Yeah, there's not going to be room there. So I think we'll come in somewhere else. I probably could do with a longer lead than that one. Okay, I found a longer lead. Not sure if it's as long as this SCART lead, but hopefully it's more standard. Yeah, it's a bit short still, but it's getting there. So what I can do, I'm not sure I really care about what's left and right that much, but I guess I should try and keep them the same. We'll just tin these, what is 2 and 6 audio inputs, and I assume the one, yeah, one, the output right is also 2, so that's the grayer coloured one. I might just have to pull both at once, I think. So the greyish one is our right and goes to 4. So it's just a matter of unsoldering that, heating it up and pulling it off, and then sticking it straight back into pin 2, and the other one's pin 6, audio input left. And I might just, not too badly done, but might just put a little bit more solder on there, make sure that is well soldered. Since I only basically tinned it, but there was a bit of excess solder in there. So we've now switched from those being audio out to audio in. also want is, I guess on the other side here, isn't it, pin 20, 18 and 16. So on 20 and 16, and we will have to hook up the earths off these leads, so we've got an earth reference down that lead as well. And where are we? 20, 18 is RGB status ground. So 18 or 17 we could use as ground, I guess. There's a lot of ground pins in this thing. So I can use the one in between, quite likely. I assume any TV or anything would have all those connected together on the circuit board. So which lead do we decide to use? So it's just a matter of snipping these off. Get rid of the plugs on one end. And just stripping a bit of this sheath off. Probably more than I need, but